The silver spacecraft tumbled through Earth's atmosphere, its sleek hull glowing red-hot from the uncontrolled entry. Inside, Kirethin gripped her seat as warning lights flashed across the control panel. Her pale blue skin glistened with sweat as she fought to stabilize the dying ship. Emergency protocols failing, the ship's computer announced in the musical language of her people. Landing gear damage. Atmospheric stabilizers offline. Kirethin's heart raced as she watched the ground rush up to meet her. The vast expanse of the Movav Desert spread out below, an endless sea of sand and rock that looked nothing like her water-rich homeworld. She had never seen so much dry land in one place. Father was right, she whispered, her delicate fingers dancing across the controls. I should have taken a larger ship with a full crew. But she had been determined to prove herself capable of handling diplomatic missions alone. Now that decision might cost her life. The ship's remaining engines sputtered and died. Kirethin closed her large violet eyes and activated her crash webbing, a net of energy designed to cushion impact. It was her last working system. The impact came hard and fast. Metal screamed against rock as the ship plowed a deep furrow through the desert floor. Kirethin's head snapped forward, then back, even as the crash webbing absorbed most of the shock. When the ship finally stopped moving, silence fell except for the ping of cooling metal. Kirethin hung in her restraints, taking stock of her injuries. Nothing seemed broken, but her entire body ached. The emergency beacon activated automatically, its soft blue light pulsing in the darkened cabin. She reached for the water dispenser, a vital system for her species, only to find it shattered. No, 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 she muttered, panic rising in her throat. Her people needed constant hydration. Their homeworld was 95% ocean, and their bodies had evolved to require frequent water intake. Even a few hours without it could be dangerous. The ship's main hatch groaned open at her touch, letting in a blast of hot, dry air. Kirethin gasped at the sensation. It felt like her moisture was being sucked right out of her skin. She had studied Earth's desert regions, but had never imagined they would feel so hostile. Climbing out of the wreck, she surveyed her surroundings. The crash had left a half-mile scar across the landscape. Pieces of her beautiful ship lay scattered in the dirt. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she could already feel her skin starting to dry out. Stay calm, she told herself, pulling out her personal scanner. Help will come. But when she checked the emergency beacon's signal strength, her heart sank. Earth's atmospheric interference was stronger than expected. The signal was barely reaching orbit. Kirethin retrieved her survival pack from the ship. Inside were several water capsules, enough for maybe 2 Earth days if she rationed carefully. After that, she pushed the thought away. Surely someone would find her before then. Setting up her portable shade shield, she tried to remember her survival training. Stay with the ship, conserve water, wait for rescue. But as the hours passed and the heat continued to rise, worry crept in. Her body wasn't made for this environment. Already she could feel her strength ebbing as precious moisture evaporated from her skin. Night fell, bringing bitter cold that made her shiver. Kirethin huddled in her crashed ship, watching the strange Earth stars wheel overhead. She thought of her father in his grand palace beneath the waves of home, of her mother who had begged her not to make this journey alone. Would she ever see them again? As she drifted into an uneasy sleep, she didn't notice the distant lights of vehicles moving across the desert, or hear the faint sound of helicopter rotors. Help was coming, though not in the form she expected. Staff Sergeant James Cooper wiped sweat from his forehead as he studied the strange readings on his handheld detector. The morning sun was barely up, but the desert heat was already building. His training exercise with the 75th Ranger Regiment had taken an unexpected turn when the device started picking up unusual energy signatures. "Base, this is Cooper," he spoke into his radio. "I'm picking up something weird about 2 miles east of my position." "Copy that, Cooper. Stay with your unit. We're tracking some unusual activity in that area." Cooper looked at the energy readings again, then at his fellow Rangers in the distance. Something about those readings bothered him. They pulsed like a heartbeat, weak but steady, like a cry for help. "Sorry, base," he muttered, switching off his radio. "But someone might need help out there." He adjusted his pack, checked his water supply, and started walking east. The desert stretched before him, a familiar landscape he'd known since childhood. His grandmother, a Navajo elder, had taught him to read these lands like others read books. After an hour of careful hiking, Cooper crested a small ridge and stopped dead in his tracks. Below him lay a half-mile scar in the earth, ending at what could only be a spacecraft. The morning sun glinted off its silver hull, now dented and partially buried in sand. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered, dropping to his belly and pulling out his binoculars. The ship was like nothing he'd ever seen. Sleek, almost organic in design. No markings he recognized. Definitely not human-made. Military training told him to call it in immediately. But then he saw movement near the wreck, a figure stumbling in the morning heat. Through his binoculars, Cooper watched in amazement as a humanoid form collapsed near the ship's entrance. Protocol be damned. Someone needed help. Cooper moved quickly but cautiously down the slope, his boots sliding in the loose sand. As he got closer, he could see the figure more clearly, feminine in shape, but definitely not human. Her skin was pale blue, and what looked like fine scales caught the sunlight. She lay unconscious near a device that projected some kind of energy shield for shade. Her skin looked terribly dry, almost cracking in places. Cooper's desert survival instincts kicked in. She was severely dehydrated. "Mom," he called out softly, approaching with his hands raised. "I'm here to help." When she didn't respond, Cooper knelt beside her and checked for signs of life. Her pulse was strange, like she had two hearts beating alternately, but it was there. Her skin felt cool despite the heat, and painfully dry. "Okay," he said, pulling out his canteen. "Let's hope you can drink earth water." He gently lifted her head and let a few drops fall on her cracked lips. To his relief, she swallowed reflexively. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing stunning violet irises that locked onto his face. She spoke, her voice musical but weak, in a language he didn't understand. Then she pressed something on a bracelet she wore, and suddenly her words became clear English. "Water, please," she whispered. Cooper helped her drink slowly, supporting her head. "I'm Staff Sergeant James Cooper, U.S. Army Rangers. Can you tell me your name?" "Kirithan," she managed between sips. "Of the Imperial House of Zarikia. Thank you for finding me." Cooper heard helicopters in the distance. His radio crackled with urgent messages he continued to ignore. He knew his career might be over for breaking protocol like this, but looking at Kirithan's grateful expression, he couldn't bring himself to care. "Ma'am," he said, shielding her from the growing heat with his own shadow. "You're safe now. I promise." She smiled weakly, her delicate fingers gripping his arm. Neither of them knew it yet, but that moment would change both their worlds forever. Kirithan watched in fascination as Cooper crushed small, round green balls between his fingers. Water droplets formed instantly, falling onto her parched skin. She had never seen anything like it. "They're called barrel cactus," Cooper explained, breaking open another one. "Desert plants store water inside. My grandmother taught me which ones are safe to use. Your people's knowledge is unexpected," Kirithan said through her translator. She sat in the shade of her ship's hull, slowly regaining strength. "Our studies suggested Earth humans relied only on technology for survival." Cooper smiled, his tanned face crinkling at the corners. "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Here, you should eat this too." He pulled out what looked like a twisted brown rope from his pack. "Dried fruit. Good for energy." The helicopters were getting closer now, their sound echoing off the desert rocks. Cooper had tried to radio them several times, but something from Kirithan's crashed ship was interfering with communications. "They will take me away for study, won't they?" Kirithan asked quietly, her violet eyes searching his face. "That is what your movies always show." "Not if I can help it," Cooper said firmly. "You're a person in need of help, not a science experiment. Besides, you said you're here on a diplomatic mission. That makes you an ambassador, not a test subject." Carithin felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the desert heat. On her world, warriors and nobles rarely spoke to each other as equals. Yet this human soldier treated her with both respect and kindness. "Tell me about your grandmother," she said, trying to distract herself from the approaching aircraft. "The one who taught you about the desert." Cooper's face lit up as he scanned the horizon. "She's Navajo, one of Earth's indigenous peoples. She taught me that the desert isn't empty at all. It's full of life if you know where to look." He pointed to tiny tracks in the sand. "See those? Kangaroo rats. They never need to drink water. They get all their moisture from seeds." "Fascinating." Carithin leaned closer to study the tracks. "On my world, nothing can survive without constant access to water. We evolved in the oceans and never fully adapted to land." A sudden gust of wind sprayed sand over them. Cooper instantly moved to shield her with his body, pulling a light scarf from his pocket and wrapping it around her head and neck. "This will help keep moisture in," he said, his hands gentle as he adjusted the fabric. "It's an old desert traveler's trick." Carithin felt her heart beat faster at his nearness. No one had ever touched her with such casual care before. On her world, such contact with a noble would be unthinkable without proper ceremonies first. The helicopters were visible now, black shapes against the morning sky. Cooper stood, placing himself between them and Carithin. "Whatever happens next," he said without looking back, "I'll make sure you're treated with respect. You have my word." "Why?" Carithin asked, genuinely curious. "You don't know me. I'm not even human. Why risk your career to help me?" Cooper turned to her, his eyes serious. "Because it's right. Because you needed help. And because where I come from, we judge people by their actions, not their species or rank." Carithin thought about the noble suitors she'd met at home, all concerned with politics and power. None had shown half the nobility of this human soldier who found water in desert plants and shared his grandmother's wisdom. As the helicopters landed, kicking up clouds of sand, Carithin made a decision. Whatever happened next, she would not forget Staff Sergeant James Cooper. In fact, she had a feeling her life would never be quite the same after meeting him. The desert base's medical center was a stark contrast to Carithin's crashed ship. Clean white walls surrounded her as human doctors bustled about, fascinated by their first alien patient. But Cooper hadn't left her side, true to his word. "Your heart rate is absolutely fascinating," one doctor said, staring at the monitor. "Two hearts beating in perfect alternation. Simply amazing." Carithin shifted uncomfortably on the examination table. "On my world, having only one heart would be considered a severe disability." She glanced at Cooper, who stood guard by the door. "No offense intended." Cooper grinned. "None taken. Though I'd say my single heart's served me pretty well so far." A senior military officer entered the room, his uniform decorated with medals. Cooper immediately stood at attention, but Carithin noticed he didn't move from his position between her and the door. "At ease, Sergeant," the officer said, then turned to Carithin. "I'm Colonel Matthews. We've contacted your people through the frequencies you provided. They're quite concerned about you." Carithin's heart sank. "My father sent the Imperial Guard, didn't he?" "A recovery team is on its way," Matthews confirmed. "They were quite insistent about your status." Cooper looked confused. "Status? I thought you said you were a diplomat." "I am," Carithin said softly. "But I'm also, well, in your terms, I suppose you'd call me a princess." The room fell silent. Cooper's eyebrows shot up, but to Carithin's surprise, his manner didn't change. He still looked at her the same way, not with the sudden awe or calculated interest she was used to from others. That explains the fancy ship, he said simply, and why you're not used to finding your own water. Kirethin felt her face flush a deeper blue. In our society, nobles rarely do anything practical. We're taught politics, art, ceremonial combat, not survival skills. She looked down at her hands. That's why I wanted this diplomatic mission, to prove I could do more. Well, Cooper said, you survived a crash in one of Earth's harshest environments. I'd say that proves something. Colonel Matthews cleared his throat. Sergeant Cooper, may I remind you that you're speaking to an alien royal? No, please, Kirethin interrupted. I prefer his honesty. On my world, no one speaks to me so directly. They're too afraid of breaking protocol. She turned to Cooper. That's why finding a suitable marriage match is so difficult for nobles. Everyone is too busy being proper to be real. Cooper's face showed surprise at the mention of marriage, but before he could respond, alarms started blaring throughout the base. Sir, a young soldier burst into the room. Unidentified aircraft entering our airspace. They're not responding to hails. Kirethin stood up quickly. The Imperial Guard. They never ask permission. They consider it beneath them. She looked worriedly at Cooper. You should go. They can be aggressive toward those they consider lower rank. Cooper crossed his arms. With all due respect, Mom, I'm not going anywhere. Colonel Matthews nodded grimly. Agreed. Sergeant Cooper stays as our liaison. He's the one who found you. That gives him standing. Kirethin felt a strange mix of fear and hope. On her world, a common soldier would never be allowed to stand as equal to the Imperial Guard. But this wasn't her world, and watching Cooper stand tall, completely unafraid of facing her people's elite warriors, she realized something important. Rank didn't make nobility. Actions did, and by that measure, James Cooper was the most noble person she'd ever met. As the sound of the approaching Zarkian ships grew louder, Kirethin made another decision. Whatever happened next, she would not let her people's prejudices dictate her heart's choice. The Zarkian ships descended from the sky like angry metal birds, their hulls gleaming purple in the desert sun. Cooper watched from the base's command center as 3 sleek vessels landed, each twice the size of an Earth helicopter. Those aren't diplomatic ships, Kirethin said nervously. Those are hunter-class vessels. Father sent his best warriors. The lead ship's door opened with a hiss of steam. 6 tall figures emerged, their armor making them look like blue-skinned giants. Each carried what were clearly weapons, though unlike any Cooper had seen before. Your Imperial Guard looks friendly, Cooper remarked dryly, checking his own sidearm. They're led by Commander Vorkath. Kirethin's voice shook slightly. He's my arranged suitor. Father must have sent him specifically. Cooper's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. Arranged suitor. You didn't mention that part. Because I never accepted it, Kirethin said firmly. In fact, this diplomatic mission was partly to avoid. She stopped as the base's radio crackled to life. Earth facility. A deep voice boomed in accented English. This is Commander Vorkath of the Imperial Guard. Release the princess immediately, or we will consider this an act of hostility. Colonel Matthews grabbed the radio. This is Colonel Matthews. Your princess is under our protection as a diplomatic visitor. She's free to leave whenever she wishes. Protection. Vorkath laughed. From primitive humans. How amusing. Princess Kirethin, come with us now. Your father is most displeased. Cooper saw Kirethin's hands trembling. Without thinking, he took one in his own. Her skin was cool against his palm, but her grip was strong. I won't go, she said, loud enough for the radio to pick up. Not with you, Vorkath. I invoke the right of choice. The command center fell silent. The Imperial Guards outside actually took a step back. Princess, Vorkath's voice was dangerous now. You cannot be serious. These humans are barely space capable. They know nothing of our ways. Yet one of them found water in the desert when your sensors couldn't even locate me. Kirathen shot back. Sergeant Cooper saved my life while you were still plotting course coordinates. Cooper squeezed her hand. Not that I'm complaining, but what exactly is the right of choice? An ancient law, Kirathen explained quickly. If a noble finds someone they believe worthy of marriage, they can challenge any arranged match. But the challenger must prove their worth through combat. Vorkath roared. Does this human truly wish to face me in battle? Cooper looked at Kirathen, saw the fear and hope in her violet eyes. Then he stepped forward and took the radio. Name your terms, Commander, he said calmly. Cooper, no. Kirathen grabbed his arm. Vorkath is undefeated in ritual combat. He's killed challengers before. Then maybe it's time someone showed him that fancy armor doesn't make a warrior, Cooper said softly. Then into the radio. Well, Commander, or are you afraid to face a primitive human? The silence stretched for a long moment. Finally, Vorkath spoke. 3 trials, he growled. Strength, cunning, and survival. If you survive all 3, you may court the princess. If you fail anyone. He left the threat hanging. I accept, Cooper said immediately. Colonel Matthews stepped forward. Sergeant, I cannot authorize you to. With respect. Sir, Cooper interrupted, this isn't a military matter anymore. He turned to Kirathen. I know I'm just a human soldier. If you don't want this, say the word and I'll stand down. Kirathen looked at him. This strange human who treated her like a person instead of a prize, who found water in the desert and held her hand when she was scared. I choose him, she announced clearly. Let the trials begin. Outside, Vorkath's angry roar echoed across the desert. The challenge was set, and there would be no turning back. The desert night was cold as Kirathen paced outside Cooper's quarters. Tomorrow, the trials would begin, and her heart wouldn't stop racing. The base was quiet except for the distant sound of Imperial guards preparing the challenge grounds. She raised her hand to knock, then lowered it again. What could she say? I'm sorry I got you into a fight to the death with the Empire's greatest warrior. The door opened suddenly, and Cooper stood there in his training clothes, looking unsurprised to see her. I could hear you thinking from inside, he said with a gentle smile. Want to walk? They walked together under the stars, their path lit by the base's floodlights. The Imperial ships loomed in the distance, their purple running lights pulsing like heartbeats. You don't have to do this, Kirathen finally said. I could go with them. Accept the arrangement. Cooper stopped walking. Is that what you want? What I want? Kirathen laughed bitterly. No one's asked me that since I was a child. Nobles don't get what they want. We get what's best for the Empire. That's not what I asked, Cooper said softly. I asked what you want. Kirathen looked at him, really looked at him. This human soldier with his kind eyes and quiet strength, who treated her like a person, not a princess, who found water in the desert and shared his food without hesitation. I want to be free, she whispered. Free to choose my own path. Free to. She stopped, her face flushing blue. Free to what? Cooper stepped closer. Free to love someone who sees me, not my title. The words rushed out before she could stop them. But I can't ask you to die for that freedom. Cooper reached out slowly and took her hand, his warm fingers intertwining with her cool ones. You're not asking. I'm choosing, just like you chose to invoke that right of yours. Vorkath will not fight fair, she warned. The first trial is tomorrow, and he has fancy armor and advanced weapons. Cooper finished. But you know what he doesn't have. Desert training, ground he knows like home, or something worth fighting for beyond his own pride. A shooting star streaked across the sky. On Kirathen's world, it would be seen as an omen. Tell me about the life you dream of, Cooper said suddenly. If you could choose anything. Kirathen closed her eyes. I dream of diplomatic work that actually helps people. of seeing new worlds without an honor guard watching my every move. She opened her eyes and looked at him, of someone who loves me for myself, not my bloodline. Sounds like a good dream, Cooper said. He was still holding her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. Even if that someone was human, she asked hesitantly. Cooper smiled. Even if that someone was an alien princess who can't find water in the desert to save her life. Kirethan laughed, then sobered. My father will be furious. The Empire will be scandalized. A human and a noble. Let them be scandalized, Cooper said firmly. But first, I have to survive tomorrow. The first trial will test strength, she told him. Vorkath will expect you to try to match his power. Cooper's eyes gleamed. Then let's give him something he doesn't expect. He squeezed her hand. I should get some rest. Big day tomorrow. As he turned to go, Kirethan caught his arm. Before she could think too much about it, she leaned up and kissed his cheek. His skin was warm against her lips. For luck, she whispered, in case your Earth stars aren't watching. Cooper touched his cheek where she'd kissed him, a slow smile spreading across his face. With luck like that, how can I lose? As she watched him walk away, Kirethan knew she'd made her choice long ago, perhaps the moment he'd found her dying in the desert. Now she just had to pray he'd survive to make his choice too. The morning sun beat down on the makeshift arena the Imperial Guards had created in the desert. Cooper stood in simple combat gear, his ranger uniform and boots. Across from him, Vorkath towered in gleaming purple battle armor. First trial, strength. Vorkath's voice boomed across the sand. You must move that boulder. He pointed to a massive rock half buried in the desert floor. If you can push it 5 meters, you pass. Kirethan, watching from a shaded platform with the other officials, felt her heart stop. The boulder was enormous. It would take 3 earth bulldozers to move it. And how are you going to move it? Cooper asked calmly. Vorkath smiled coldly and pressed a button on his armor. A blue energy field surrounded him. With a grunt, he walked to a similar boulder and pushed. The massive rock slid through the sand like it was floating. Your turn, human, he sneered. Without our superior technology, of course. Cooper walked to his boulder, studying it carefully. Then he did something unexpected. He knelt down and began digging in the sand around its base. What is he doing? Colonel Matthews whispered. Kirethan watched intently. Cooper had said Vorkath didn't understand the desert. Was this what he meant? After 10 minutes of digging, Cooper stood up and walked to the opposite side of the boulder. He picked up a long metal pole that had been lying in the sand, part of the arena's construction materials. Interesting thing about desert rocks, Cooper said loudly, jamming the pole under the boulder where he'd dug. They're often not as deep as they look. He placed a smaller rock under the pole. Basic physics, lever and fulcrum. With all his strength, Cooper pushed down on the pole. The boulder shifted, then slowly began to roll. Once it started moving, its own momentum carried it across the sand, well past the 5-meter mark. Trial complete, Cooper said, wiping sand from his hands. Vorkath roared in anger. Trickery. This was a test of strength. No, Cooper replied calmly. It was a test of moving a boulder. You used your way, I used mine. The human is correct, announced the Imperial judge. The trial is passed. Then let's see how clever you are in the second trial. Vorkath snarled. He pressed another button on his armor, and a holographic maze appeared in the air. Find your way through while avoiding the death traps. I'll be hunting you. Cooper studied the maze. And you'll be using your armor sensors to track me. Of course, Vorkath smiled cruelly. Unless you'd like to borrow some superior technology. No thanks, Cooper said. But you might want to look up. Everyone looked up. The desert sun was directly overhead, blazing with intense heat. Your armor, Cooper continued. All that power must generate a lot of heat, Must be pretty hot in there. Vorkath's smile faltered slightly. Sweat was already visible on his blue skin. You have 10 minutes in the maze, the judge announced. Begin. Cooper entered the maze at a run. Vorkath followed, his armor's cooling systems already working overtime in the desert heat. Kirathen watched the holographic display showing their positions. Cooper wasn't trying to reach the exit. He was running in circles, making Vorkath chase him. After 5 minutes, Vorkath's movements became sluggish. His armor, designed for space combat, was overheating in the desert sun. Meanwhile, Cooper, used to desert training, showed no signs of slowing. 8 minutes in, Vorkath's armor shut down completely, leaving him trapped in the maze. Cooper simply walked to the exit, passing the second trial. Impressive, Colonel Matthews said. He used the environment against his opponent's technology. Kirathen felt pride swell in her chest. But her joy was short-lived as Vorkath emerged from the maze, his face dark with rage. The final trial will not be so easy, human, he spat. Tomorrow, we test survival. In space. Cooper met Kirathen's worried eyes and gave her a reassuring nod. But they both knew. The hardest test was still to come. The Imperial ship's airlock opened to reveal a harsh desert planet, far worse than Earth's Moab. 2 suns beat down on endless red dunes, and the air was so dry it crackled with static. The final trial, Vorkath announced, his armor gleaming in the alien sunlight, survived 24 hours on Kepler 186, the deadest world in our empire. No water, no shelter, no help. Cooper stood at the airlock in a basic environment suit the Zarkians had provided. No fancy technology, just air and basic protection from the elements. The human will die here, one of the Imperial guards whispered. No one survives Kepler 186 without full battle armor. Kirathen, watching from the ship's viewport, pressed her hand against the glass. She had been forbidden from speaking to Cooper before the trial, but their eyes met briefly before he stepped onto the planet's surface. Remember what I taught you, he had told her the night before. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Now, watching him walk into that deadly desert, she finally understood what he meant. The first few hours were tense. Vorkath, also on the surface but in his full armor, kept trying to corner Cooper in the open. But Cooper stayed on the move, reading the dunes like his grandmother had taught him. What is he doing? Colonel Matthews asked as Cooper began digging under a rocky overhang. Kirathen's eyes widened. He's looking for water. Just like on Earth, Cooper found what he was searching for. Desert plants, alien but similar enough to what he knew. Their thick stems held precious moisture. He also found shallow caves where the temperature was cooler, used his suit's fabric to collect morning dew, and even located mineral deposits that helped him stay hydrated. Vorkath, relying on his armor systems, began to struggle as the harsh environment took its toll. His power cells drained faster than expected, and the extreme temperature swings played havoc with his sensors. 20 hours in, Vorkath's armor failed completely. The mighty warrior found himself trapped in a heavy metal shell, immobile in the deadly desert. His emergency beacon lit up the sky. Cooper, seeing this, did something unexpected. He walked back to help his fallen opponent. "Leave me to die with honor," Vorkath growled as Cooper approached. "That's not how we do things where I come from," Cooper replied, helping drag the armored warrior to shelter. He shared his harvested water, teaching Vorkath how to survive without technology. When the 24 hours ended, both men walked back to the ship alive. Vorkath was silent for a long moment, then removed his helmet and faced the Imperial judge. "The human has passed all trials," he announced formally. "But more than that, he has shown true nobility. I withdraw my claim to the princess's hand." Kirathen ran to Cooper as he removed his suit. Before everyone assembled, she threw her arms around him. "I knew you could do it," she whispered. "Had a pretty good reason to survive," he replied softly, holding her close. The Imperial judge raised his hands for silence. The trials are complete. Sergeant James Cooper has proven himself worthy through strength, cunning, and survival. More importantly, he has shown mercy to an opponent, the mark of true nobility. 1 year later, Cooper and Kirithin stood in that same Movav desert where they first met. Their wedding combined Earth traditions with Zarkian customs. The Imperial Guard stood honor guard alongside U.S. Army Rangers. And there, in the desert that had brought them together, something magical happened. The spring rains had come early that year, and the desert bloomed. Tiny flowers covered the sand, their colors matching the blue of Kirithin's skin and the tan of Cooper's uniform. "Look," Cooper said, picking one of the flowers. "Even the hardest places can create something beautiful." "Like us?" Kirithin asked, taking his hand. "Like us," he agreed, and kissed his alien princess as two worlds celebrated their union under the desert sky.